This is On Base, your one-stop shop for solving your most pressing B2B go-to-market challenges. Each week, hosts Chris Moody and Paul Gibson talk to sales and marketing leaders to get you in-depth insights and creative strategies to set your revenue teams up for success.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back. I'm your host, Paul Gibson, and today I'm super excited to be talking with Jens Olivarius, who has a distinguished professional background in marketing for a number of different global technical companies. Most recently, Jens was CMO at FE Fundinfo, previously being part of the executive team at MDM Solutions, company Stibo. He was CMO at SimCorp, a global investment management IT solutions company, following an 18-year career with SaaS Institute, where he undertook a variety of sales and marketing roles, both in the US and also Denmark. He personally resides in the beautiful city of Copenhagen. It's great to have you here today, Jens. And as a 3 times demand-based client, I'm excited to talk to you today. So welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Paul. I've been looking forward to it.
Excellent. So let's get started, Jens. It's a pretty distinguished career so far, and it's a good place to start for the listeners. Can you initially tell us how you got interested in marketing, a little bit about how you got to your journey where you are today?
Yeah, absolutely. It's in a little bit of a roundabout way. I'd say I've always been very interested in business, economics, finance in particular. And it happened to be that Copenhagen Business School, where I was attending class, they offered a master in marketing economics, basically, I think was the title of it. And what was interesting about it was that it was the first time I had seen something that actually combined sort of the more traditionally creative marketing discipline with that of finance. And the whole sort of idea behind it was that, they had seen marketing come to a point where it became really important to start looking into the actual results that marketing would create. So hence sort of that whole focus on the financial aspect of marketing. So it wasn't really only considered a cost, but really an investment, and what could you get from that investment. So that kind of spurred my sort of initial interest in marketing and related disciplines. So, but from a sort of a working point of view, what I did first was actually I joined SaaS Institute in a pure sales capacity. So for a few years, I was doing sales, selling business intelligence solutions to large manufacturing companies, pharmaceutical companies, and so on, which was super exciting. I had that sort of marketing background, but I always felt that it was going to be important for me to have the direct sales experience, both in terms of being sort of a credible marketer to my sales peers, but also sort of from a leadership perspective to kind of appreciate all the aspects of that whole continuum from marketing through sales and so on. So I felt, I spent some time with that and enjoyed that until there was an opportunity to take over marketing for SaaS in Denmark. So that was interesting. In my early days with the SaaS, the company was considering an IPO. That led to us working quite a bit with the brand. They wanted to kind of sex it up a little bit, if you want. That led me to work with a number of people in corporate at SaaS Institute in North Carolina, and eventually was offered an opportunity to come and help build out a global marketing team. One of the things that I undertook in that was actually establishing a marketing operations function. It was probably before that term had really been coined, but it was super interesting to kind of start looking into, again, the effects of marketing and how it impacted the business and sales, not the least. Just, as a point of reference, Paul, it was completely different times back then, and things have changed a lot since. But I remember at that point in time, I was also responsible for a fairly large advertising budget. And back then, we were offered digital advertising as a way to grease the wheels when we were buying print advertising. Fast forward quite a few years, that has changed significantly, right? I mean, most advertising today is probably focused around digital channels and so on. So, yeah, those were sort of my initial things that were kind of also kept it interesting for me as we were going. Lots of things were changing even back then.
Yeah, it's interesting that the sales side of your background is really powerful because we'll talk about it later today, I'm sure. But the alignment of sales and marketing is such a critical element, and understanding how sales work really helps the marketing side of things. And a really good point. You've obviously had your experience in lots of different areas, and as you say, the world of marketing is really changing so fast. What particularly excites you about where we are today and where this fascinating industry is going in the future?
Yeah, that's a good question. So one of the benefits of having been around for quite a while is that I've seen a lot of that change. And I think, one of the most significant changes that have happened over the years, and I think to some extent it's still ongoing, is that of, you can say, the control of the narrative shifting a bit from marketing and sales more towards the buyer. So the buyers today, in particular in the B2B environment, I find are in control of a lot of things. And in some senses, it takes it back to that, it means for us as marketers and sales and so on, that we have to be relevant. And I think, that has always been the case, right? You have to be relevant to the buyer. But I think even more so now than ever, it's not enough to just, stand on your soapbox and shout all the great messages that you have. You really need to be considerate of what the buyer is looking for, understanding their potential strategies and whatever have you, so that you have an idea about what potentially informs their decision making and so on, and then try and be relevant in that context, right? So most marketers have learned a long time ago that it is not just about one-way communication and so on. It's still, I think it's super important to continue to remember that. And I think in some respects also, not only are buyers in control, but they are also getting less and less patient. They don't have a lot of time to sift through all sorts of even relevant material because there's just an abundance of material out there in the digital channels in particular. So you really have to be mindful of what it is that you're trying to do and find interesting ways to communicate that. So, for me, that kind of makes it full circle in terms of what marketing is all about. It's still about being creative and finding creative ways to get your message across in whatever channels are present and to the people out there, again, with a good understanding of what it is that they're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point. We see it day in, day out, really, that a lot of the traditional B2C tactics are still being used in the B2B world. Like two terms that always come up with spray and pray, advertise to anyone and everyone and hope that you get it right. That doesn't work anymore. And emailing in the same way. I heard a term the other day that we've got to stop using spam cannons, emailing anyone and everyone with the same message, hoping something's relevant. That doesn't work anymore. People, to your point, have got much more subjective and much more impatient. And if you're not hitting them with a relevant message based on what's of interest to them, their industry, where they are in the buyer journey, you're just going to lose them. So, yeah, really good points.
And I also think, Paul, now that you mentioned email, it's many people have talked about it kind of being a dead tactic for a while. But I think in some respects, it's probably a little unfair. I still think it can be quite relevant and quite a good tactic. But again, we have to do it the right way. And as with all tactics, it's a little bit like the pendulum is swinging in different directions and kind of coming back. So for a period of time, back in the day, we were doing a lot of printed invitations and things like that, and that was the way to do it. Then that was kind of overtaken by digital email specifically. And then now it's almost like if you want to be heard, you kind of need to do something that's not email or digital. But I still think there's a place for everything. It's really more about, again, understanding the buying process and kind of when is it appropriate to have that email contact with whomever it is that you're communicating with.
Yeah, absolutely. And intent, again, probably something we'll touch on later on today, but is a massive way of knowing, is this the right time to contact someone? But direct mail actually is something that we utilize a lot now. And I get most of the interest from prospects comes from when you do something a bit different, as you say. And I get thousands of emails every day, and the majority of them, you can see that it's just come out of one of these spam cannons and it's not even worth opening. But when it's relevant, and if it's something that's a a right subject, do you know what? Even if it's not something that's relevant to me right now, I can see they put the effort in. I'll always respond and just say not right now, but come back at a certain time. So yeah, getting that stuff right is so important. And yeah, we're never going to turn email off, I'm pretty sure. So moving on, we talk about the changing world of marketing. AI is a subject that I think we'll admit is on everyone's lips right now. What areas do you see AI making a real difference? And do you share the perceived threat out there by many, which that jobs are at risk?
Yeah, it's super exciting times with AI, I think, and to address sort of the latter question first in terms of the threat. It's quite interesting because I saw an ad recently that in some ways encapsulates my thinking, at least. It said something to the effect of AI took my job to new levels. And I think that's really what it's about to a large extent. It's about, a new technology, a new set of tools out there that can help you increase productivity, which means that some of the less exciting tasks that you may have to do as part of your job, can be taken over by AI. So for me, at least, I see it less as a threat and more as an opportunity to focus your time and energy on the things that are, really fun and important, And the other thing is, I think there's a lot of focus right now on the productivity play of AI, but I think that's almost a given that will just happen, just like we have learned to use a lot of other tools during time to improve our productivity. But I think where it's really going to make a huge difference is in a slightly different dimension, which is that of how do I improve my product or my service through the use of AI? So coming from a data business, we spend a lot of time quality checking data that was important for other people to make investment decisions on. So I think from that perspective, a lot of that, some of it happened, of course, or in an automated fashion, but quite a bit of it still happened also through manual checks and so on. And I just think that AI presents a huge potential in terms of shifting some of that work to be much more automated and actually finding inconsistent data connections and so on that we wouldn't otherwise be able to find, or at least not easily. So I think there are plenty of opportunities there. And this is really where I think the ones that are going to be leading in the AI game are the ones that are really thinking about that, how can customers benefit from us implementing AI through our value proposition, basically.
Yeah, great points. And I think there's a lot of stuff coming now around AI about what next. I see a customer working in a particular way or a prospect doing a particular thing, what next? And AI helping a lot of those decisions along, which will speed up the process. So yeah, there's some great stuff coming. And I again, don't see it so much as a job replacement. It's a job enhancement. If I can take all of those boring manual things that I have to do day to day out of my job, I can actually spend the time being creative and thinking and doing the right thing. So yeah, lots of excitement to come, I think, there.
Exactly. And I think on the point of creativity, you have one of the bigger players in Microsoft, they already named it a co-pilot, right? But I think that is what you have. You have a co-pilot that can give you a lot of different options. You may not like some of these creative options, but it gives you ideas that you can then continue working with, and eventually, you'll get to a different level of creativity, I think, than you would otherwise be able to.
Yeah, I think that creativity might be the biggest challenge, because even now I'm starting to see very, very similar emails coming out from different people that you almost get the feeling they're all putting the same things into ChatGPT. They're getting their responses out and that's what they're using without adding any creativity of their own to it. And we've got to be careful that we don't end up everything is AI and we all start turning that off because we know it is. But yeah, lots of excitement to come, I think.
Yeah.
Earlier on, you talked about the importance of aligning sales and marketing, and your background makes that you have an advantage over many. Can you share some of your thoughts on why you think this is so important, especially in the B2B world we live in?
Yeah, exactly. And I think, again, really focusing on B2B, I mean, for me in my career, at least, it's been typically very long processes, sales processes, buying processes. It's been typically a lot of different touch points. It's been, as we've seen, growing buying committees, more and more people that you've had to kind of influence and work with in those processes. So that in itself is calling for a more holistic view. It's not really just marketing and sales and so on. It has to be seen as a continuum from sort of initial contact all the way through to initial sales. Then after that initial sale, hopefully additional sales, upsell, additional services, whatever it is that you're selling. I mean, there's just so many opportunities. So it's really I think it's important to look at it as more of a continuum rather than a set of silos, where you're kind of throwing things over the fence. I think it's coming also from having seen it not working, having had that sort of very siloed approach, and that just doesn't really work very well. You lose kind of overview of kind of what's happening in that process and so on. So obviously, one of the things this is coming down to is this whole topic of attribution. And I think in some ways, attribution is, of course, important. But at the end of the day, what's more important than attribution, which is really a discussion about, is it marketing that had the last touch or the sales or whatever. But at the end of the day, it's really about the customer experience and jointly winning that customer. So until we have won the customer, and until the customer is happy and excited about the products or services that we're providing, it doesn't really matter. And that can't be sort of a departmental focus. That has to be a more of a holistic view on how do we accomplish that. Again, in my experience, at least, it's worked by far the best where there's been a good shared understanding of how marketing and sales would work together to accomplish exactly that.
Yeah, great points. And the buying committees is something that comes up a lot. We know that there's multiple people in a business that are going to make those decisions, and sometimes sales are talking to a few of them, but not all of them. And there's a lot of stuff happening anonymously. And people like Forrester are now talking about something called buying groups. That ability to focus. Everyone's got limited time, budget, and resource now, right? So if you can focus it on those groups of buyers within that organization, yes, an account-based approach is really important, but if you can actually nail it to that buying group, that's going to be a real game changer going forward. So I think there's lots of excitement out there, but yeah, really good insights there.
And I think on that note, sorry, Paul, I think on that note, talking about buying groups, when you look at a group of people, I mean, it is a group of people for a reason, right? They're all bringing different perspectives, different experiences, different requirements to the table. And that also means that they come from, in some cases, very different backgrounds. So they may still be at the same company and part of that group, but they may represent different functions, different experiences, all that stuff. And so I think that calls for a very sort of considered approach as to how you deal with a group like that. Because again, people with such different backgrounds may also require different ways of being communicated with. Been there myself, sometimes I think we tend to look at it as too much of a unit, and at the end of the day, behind the scenes, it's all people, real people like you and me with different history, and again, different expectations, requirements, and so on. And we really have to cater to that. Unless you manage to reach that individual, you're really not managing to sway that committee in the right direction, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've got to make sure that marketing and sales are saying the same thing to that business. One message that's completely different to the other, and you just lose that ability to understand and work closely with that prospect. So on that, just closing off the loop on sales and marketing, I know we hear it a lot that there's sometimes a lack of trust between the leaders of the marketing and the leaders of sales, and who's doing what, and are they doing the best for each other? How do you feel from your experience is the best way that businesses can overcome that?
So I'll come to what I think is the best way to do it, but I think the inherent conflict sort of stems from sales naturally being more short-term focused. I mean, focusing on the next deal, the next month's results, the next quarter, and so on. Whereas marketing naturally has a bit more of a longer-term focus. And I think that in particular comes through when we are talking about sort of building brand preference. I think everybody will acknowledge that that's not happening overnight. That's something that takes time, right? So you have those different time perspectives. But how do you kind of overcome some of that and make it work then? I mean, in my experience, where it's worked quite well is one, to have shared targets. So it's not about marketing qualified leads and sales qualified leads. And it's not only about that. It's also about having shared targets as in, revenue, additional sales, number of new customers, customer satisfaction, some of those things. So bring those things into play and make it the same for sales and marketing, I think is a key way to drive more of a shared mindset on what it is that we want to accomplish. And then I think underpinning that, of course, are sort of the fundamental processes. And again, where I've found it to work well is when I've been working with my sales peers to actually review, redefine the underpinning processes about, okay, how do we go from that sort of initial contact all the way throughout the life cycle, and who's doing what, when, and why, so that we have clarity and agreement on roles and responsibilities throughout. I think that's, if you can get to that and you can have some sound and constructive discussions around how it works best in your business, given whatever constraints and the ways you're currently working, I think that's the best way to get to that point of establishing that trust. And then, of course, being able to demonstrate it, right, in real life work.
Yeah, I think that's often the challenge. We hear a lot about, the revenue numbers aren't being hit, and sales are saying it's because their pipeline's full of deals that they can't close, and therefore the sales are chasing deals they shouldn't be. And when you look at it, often it's going back to what we were talking about earlier, that spray and pray approach, that perhaps I want to get my brand out there, so I'll just advertise to everyone and get my brand out there. And a lot of the people that are excited in seeing your brand and click and go on your website and go into your pipeline are actually companies your business can't sell to. And therefore, there's that frustration there. So I think that alignment and the shared targets that sales and marketing are both focusing on the same companies because they're the ones that your business wants to sell to is a bit of a game changer. Yeah, so really good insight there. Now, it's great being able to say this. You're a 3-time demand-based client, which is excellent news. And so you've got lots of experience using ABM technologies. And there's a constant discussion we hear around ABM or ABX or GTM or whatever analogy you want to use. And if where technology fits in this, what we think is a very important tactic for the B2B world. One example, intent, seems to be getting a really bad press at the moment. What experience have you had around that, positive or otherwise? And do you think intent is a key part of any B2B play?
Yeah, sure. I think, Paul, the first time I really experienced the benefits of ABM and intent was when I was with SimCorp, and we had recently started working with you guys on implementing the platform. The business was revolving around doing a lot of RFPs. And so we were actually responding to a particular RFP for a pension fund in Canada. And they were in the market for a back office solution to help them with some investment accounting. And we happily, joined in on that RFP process. But as we did, we also started monitoring them through the demand-based platform in terms of, what other things are these guys looking for. And during the course of just a few weeks, we actually learned that not only were they researching back office accounting solutions, but they were also looking for quite a bit of front office related functionality. And we fed that information to our sales rep, who went back to the client and said, happy to be part of your RFP process for the accounting solution, but are you in fact aware that we can provide you with an end-to-end solution covering both back office, middle office, and front office functionality? And, fast forward 3 months, we closed a deal for that whole end-to-end process. So a much larger deal that we would otherwise have had. And that was, of course, great for the company. But again, coming back to that whole relationship between marketing and sales, it was also incredibly important for the relationship in that sales all of a sudden saw that marketing could provide other than just fancy trade show booths and T-shirts and balloons and what have you. We actually provided real valuable intelligence about the client, something that they would otherwise not, most likely not have been able to pick up. So your question, that would not have happened without us understanding their intent, understanding that what they were looking for, and so on. And we saw many other examples since of that working. So I'm a true believer, as you can tell.
That's excellent. And also, I think from, I know we've touched on that a few times, but the alignment that you get there with sales when marketing are able to introduce something that sales weren't aware of and increase the chances, of winning that deal, and obviously, increase the size of that deal as well. I think that's really exciting. And then I'm almost certain, I would imagine, that other salespeople are now getting excited about the intent signals, because it's then going to help them hopefully get more and bigger deals. So, yeah. So we're rushing through time-wise now, but we've got one, probably a fairly big question to end on here. So we hear a lot about companies that, once pressure comes on the business, maybe revenue numbers aren't quite where they are. They start cutting back marketing and sales budgets, and unfortunately sometimes headcount as well. And our view is that this is actually quite short-termism and misses the point that it's often the wrong tactics rather than the wrong people that are causing these issues. I just wondered what your view was on that.
Yeah. It is, of course, unfortunate, and it is, been there a few times before, where when you have gone through, maybe pretty far into the year, you realize these challenges, and of course, I can appreciate from a finance perspective what are the things that what are levers you can pull, right? And because of they're often sitting some money in unused budgets, or at least not fully executed budgets, it's a place to try and pull money from, right? So, but it is very short term, because at the end of the day, in my opinion, you can't save yourself to growth. You've got to be out there and do the right things to support that growth. But then, to your point, it's really about are you then doing the right tactics? And the problem is very often when you see these marketing cuts happening, then I've seen examples where you've tried to save the staff in the first place. And I think, that's a very human way to look at it. But at the same time, it creates a problem if you're only taking away sort of discretionary spend, because at the end of the day, the people in the marketing function, they need to have money to work with. Otherwise, it's a bit difficult, right? So I think it's really important, as difficult as it may be, that if you're forced into that situation of having to make structural change, that you look at it in a way where you take a balanced approach and make sure that you have that right balance between the people able to execute and the money to actually ensure that the execution can take place. To make sure that you have that right sort of program to people ratio, if you want. But again, it doesn't take away from the fact that I think it's unfortunate when your marketing function suffers from that, because again, it is a more of a long-term play. It's not, if you expect your marketing function to, crank out something on a weekly, monthly basis, well, you can do that with certain things, but the real play, I think, is more mid to long term, and so it will require more of that perspective, also from a finance perspective.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And I think we talk a lot about cutting waste, not resources, when you're looking at what do we do next. And if you're advertising to, let's say I sell to financial services and I'm advertising my brand to French Connection, a big retailer, great, I might get them clicking and coming to my website and going into pipeline, but it's not a company I can ever sell to. It just stop doing things like that first before you cut budgets. And you might find you actually have a better pipeline, therefore better deals closing, and those revenue numbers that you're under pressure to hit are being hit by just cutting that wasted effort. So interesting.
Yeah.
And this has been a really good session, Jens. And from my viewpoint, I don't think we've hardly scratched the surface, and I think there's a lot more. So I might come back to you for a future podcast at some point if that's something you're open to. But
that'd be fun, always.
For now, I'd love to from your experience, we've got listeners out there that obviously get a lot from yourself, but also are there any books, blogs, newsletters, websites, anything you'd recommend to our listeners that they should look out for?
I think we all have our sort of different preferences. Personally, I use LinkedIn quite a bit and come across a number of different and interesting things in that forum. A couple of people that I've read sort of content from and recently have been a guy named Mats Georgsson from Georgsson and Company. It's talking a little bit more sort of about strategic marketing, branding, things like that. Mark Ritson, I also think is often a good source. And then I'm a fun subscriber of a local newsletter from a company called Quadrant that I have been working with in the past. And they sit sort of in the intersection of sales and marketing and actually have some really cool and interesting perspectives on how to make that work. So very much in line with some of the things that we have discussed here today.
Excellent. And it's always good to get some different names. We get a few that are ruled out by everyone, but there's some good names in there that maybe people aren't aware of that should definitely check out. So the next one's a bit of a selfish ask. If you could share names of other inspirational people in the space that you think would be good to bring on this show in the future.
Yeah, and again, I'd say these guys that I've been working with from Quadrant, so while they are headquartered here in Copenhagen, I mean, they do work internationally as well. They have a couple of people like Brian Anderson and has some great perspectives. And Mikkel Bach Anderson is another one from that same company. That both guys are really good and very knowledgeable. One of my former colleagues, Charlotte Blaker, who's currently with Mercell, we have worked together on ABM implementations, and she has a very sort of practical, hands-on perspective that might be interesting for some of your listeners as well. Mm-hmm. And then I'd say the last one, maybe Jolanta Pileshka that I've worked with from HG Capital, where she was kind of overseeing marketing for all their portfolio companies. She has a huge amount of experience and lots of really great perspectives on marketing strategy.
Excellent. Appreciate that, Jens. And look out for them on future podcasts. And I'll definitely let them know that it was you that dropped their names in. So that's great. I've really enjoyed today. If people listening wanted to contact you to find out more, maybe pick your brains on certain subjects, how would you recommend they best get in touch with you after this podcast?
Yeah, thank you, Paul. It's been a pleasure. I'd love to get in touch with anybody who has an interest in discussing some of these things. I can always be found on LinkedIn. That is sort of my go-to place in many ways. So happy to pick up the connection there.
Excellent. And last time I was in Copenhagen at a business event, myself and Jens met up for a coffee. It took me a long time to find it, but it was a lovely little place. So I would always recommend Copenhagen as a destination to go to if you've not been there. Thanks again. Great session today. And thanks everyone who listened. Thanks again, Jens. Have a great day.
Thanks for joining us for On Base. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to share, rate, review, and subscribe on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. This show is brought to you by Demandbase, the only account-based experience platform built for sales and marketing alignment.